On the morning of April 18, 1961, 60-year-old chicken farmer Joe Simonton had heard a peculiar noise coming from outside his Wisconsin home. He lived alone and wasn't expecting anyone at the time. Stepping into his yard, Joe was blown away by what he saw. A silver-colored saucer-shaped craft, brighter than chrome, was hovering close to the ground. Suddenly, a hatch opened, and Joe could see 3 occupants inside the craft. One of the occupants inside the craft was looking at Joe. They held up an object that looked like a jug. Joe began to walk over. What makes Joe's encounter so unique is that not only had he claimed to have seen a UFO hovering in the sky above his backyard, but he also claims to have met the occupants inside the craft. Joe's encounter predates the widely publicized Betty and Barney Hill incident where the couple claimed they were abducted by aliens while driving through a rural portion of New Hampshire in September 1961. Joe was amazed at what was happening before his eyes. After the craft landed, a pod door opened and a short being holding what appeared to be a jug emerged. Joe kept his distance, but he could see the being motioning with its hand, which he says they then brought to their mouth, as if they wanted water. Joe walked over to collect the jug so he could fetch the being water. However, when recounting the story to local reporters, Joe admitted he couldn't look the being directly in the eyes because, quote, their gaze was so piercing.
And then there stood a little man, I say a little man, about 5 foot tall, holding up a jug or a container, and he motioned he wanted to drink. He motioned for water. So I walked up to him to get this jug, and I looked at his eyes, and they were so penetrating that I had to look away. So I went to the basement to get this water, and I thought, well, they want water, so I'll take it up to them and see what happens.
After Joe returned from the basement with the water, he presented the jug to the being. Joe says the being, who he described as a small man, returned to the craft. Joe followed and says he could see there was another small man cooking what appeared to be pancakes on a grill. Joe motioned with his hand and brought it to his mouth as to say to the man cooking, "Are you going to do some eating?" But instead, the man who was cooking handed Joe a stack of greasy, hot pancakes.
I noticed this little man, same size of a man, right to the right side of the hatchway, cooking these pancakes, which I have one here yet. He was frying these pancakes, and I pointed to him and made a gesture like eating. I thought maybe I'd get a conversation out of him. Nobody was saying anything. But he didn't say a word. He just reached over and he got a handful of them, 4 of them, and he handed them down to me. And they were hot and greasy.
Joe saved one of the pancakes that was given to him by the man aboard the craft. After contacting Police Sheriff Schroeder to report the incident, 2 deputies were dispatched to Joe's home, who then contacted the U.S. Air Force. Astronomer J. Allen Hynek was dispatched by the U.S. Air Force to investigate the incident.
No one can deny they're incontrovertible points. Even the grossest skeptic can't deny them. First of all, is that the UFO reports not only exist but persist. See, when I started with the Air Force, I thought that this was a fad. In a few years, it would just disappear.
Be all over, okay.
And it's global. We have reports now from 140 countries. I mean, practically as many countries as there are in the United Nations.
J. Allen Hynek was an American astronomer, professor, and UFO researcher who worked for the U.S. Air Force under 3 projects: Project Sign, Project Grudge, and Project Blue Book. Hynek took one of the pancakes away for government analysis at the Air Force Technical Intelligence Center. The government concluded the pancake consisted of hydrogenated fat, starch, buckwheat hulls, soybean hulls, and wheat bran. Bacteria and radiation levels came back normal. I think it's important to consider that Joe's encounter was significant enough to prompt an investigation by the U.S. Air Force. The tests on the pancake's composition were even done at the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare's Food and Drug Laboratory. Although after all the tests were complete, the Air Force claimed the pancake was of terrestrial origin, and that Joe must have been in a sudden dream while he was awake and inserted that dream into a continuum of the events around him for which he was conscious for.